Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to review Thor the Dark World. Thank you, everybody, for going on and checking out Batman Nightfall. If you came here from there, I really do appreciate it. Or if you just randomly just came on to here, I thank you for being here because hopefully you'll want to go on and check out more of the superhero stuff I have in store. Because believe me, this is just not going to go on and be a complete halt at this point. If anything, I'm probably going to take a little bit of smaller projects and then ramp back up because I've been taking on a lot of big projects lately. But if anything, I do plan on getting out more superhero stuff in the future. I do have a plan of getting out all of the Avengers characters, then going into Avengers stuff, eventually realizing that all of this will kind of be matching with what, of course, be the big event going on right now, which is Doomsday. But eventually, after Doomsday happens, eventually, like, all this is to be time capsuling exactly when this is going on. But believe me, I have a plan. Like, I know how valuable Batman is to a lot of people also, so I'm gonna eventually cover more of that. Believe me, Batman is not just gonna be a one-off thing. We're coming back to it. So I already have something in plan. I already have an idea. So let's talk about what we're here for, which is Thor the Dark World. So this show is to be continued off the movie Avengers, because of course we go from Thor, Avengers, then Thor the Dark World. Probably a scramble of a number of movies in between all of that stuff. But if anything, like, I wanted to go on and cover this one and then eventually bounce around a bit from all the other characters, because I know I have a lot to cover. I have a lot of ground to cover here. So this movie goes on and really takes a lot of time to cover one event, which is be the Convergence. We have this event where all these 9 realms are to combine, and we have a dark elf named Malekith that is to have failed at going on and gathering up the ether to himself. So since he failed once, he's like, well, we're going to go at the same exact plan all over again, because if anything, like, the ether is out there somewhere, it's woken us up, so from our dormant sleep, so we're going to try and get one more run to get this correct this time and take out Asgard, because we'd come to find out that King Bor had wiped out a good chunk of the Dark Elves, but they still exist. To the point where even in, I think it's one of the Guardians of the Galaxies, there is a Dark Elves Easter egg somewhere in the collector's cage of things. But so, we come into Thor the Dark World, and so we have to realize that, of course, Loki had gotten captured by the Avengers and is now taken to Asgard to be judged, and axe swung on him to eventually have him be dungeoned out, and him going on and having his mother just kind of look after him and just kind of be upset when Loki is to try and push away his family and the ones that love him. So we come to find that Jane is to have had to be forced to move on from Thor, because 2 years has passed since when he promised that he'd come back to her in the first movie. So now Jane is like, well, I'll go on and I'll find some other guy, but also Darcy's coming to me about this whole bit of instruments that are going haywire. Why is this all going on? So it seems that Jane is at the right place at the right time, and so she comes to find that London, where she is now, not New Mexico, is to be the home of this weird portal event where they would go on to chuck these things through this portal, and then it comes like up and down, up and down, up. Like, what the heck is going on here? And how at some point they would go on to take this car and just have it roll, and because no gravity in some spots. So it's kind of just a little strange what exactly is going on here. So Jane eventually, while looking around and taking data from her instruments, gets sucked into this one portal that leads her to the ether, because it seems that Jane was hoping to look for Thor, but she found something else. So King Boar had gone on to fight off against Malekith, and eventually had separated the ether away from Malekith, and eventually King Boar, when winning the battle against the Dark Elves, had the plan of taking the ether and burying it somewhere deep. So, coincidentally, Jane was to have been the one to have found this deep place to portal to touch the ether, to have it then consume her, get inside of her, and then as she makes her way back to Earth 5 hours later, we then have Thor that arrives and is just very concerned about Jane because Heimdall could not see her. And eventually, as Jane is to defend herself with these now ether powers, Thor is like, this doesn't seem right. Immediately have to go on and take Jane to Asgard and see if they can figure her out. Odin comes in and is immediately just like, hey, Jane should not be here. She's immortal. If anything, they have doctors where she comes from that they can figure out how to make her well. It seems overkill for her to be here, up until the point where all of a sudden Jane again tries to start defending herself. And they're like, whoa, okay. Maybe we're wrong about that. So Odin goes on to this ancient relic book room and eventually starts popping off this story about the Dark Elves, which eventually no part of that story is to reveal how Jane is to get the ether from outside of her. So Malekith is to have been awakened by the ether's presence outside of where it was laid dormant. So Malekith takes Algrim to go with the prisoners who were to have gone on and been captured from Vanaheim, because Thor had gone on to Hogun's realm called Vanaheim and taken out some threats and tried to keep the Nine Realms balanced. And eventually I'll talk more in detail about that shortly. But there were some prisoners captured, they were put into dungeons, and eventually we'd find that Algrim is one of them. So Algrim goes on and eventually breaks himself out of this prison, because once he becomes cursed, eventually he becomes this unstoppable force that the normal Asgardian can't really easily defeat. Plus, also, it's kind of even hard for Thor and Loki to even take him down, because eventually we'll come to find what happens to Loki in this film. But really, again, like, we've already seen this song and dance with Loki at some point in the first movie, and it kind of becomes this endless running joke. Eventually, if you also know that there's going to be a certain show about a certain character, like, a lot of things will get spoiled and ruined for you if you haven't gone on to see much of these MCUs at this point, because everybody has a beginning somewhere. Somebody can finally find that Doomsday is to finally be the one movie that it's like, okay, now I want to finally check out this whole Marvel MCU thing. it's surprising. There are those unicorns out there that haven't quite covered or seen every MCU thing, which I do eventually am like, cool. Like, it's great to finally see a new person that hasn't caught up all these films and check them out for the first time. So we make our way into Algrim breaking out of this prison and eventually making his way to Loki's cell. And then Loki goes on and tells him, hey, you might as well go to this door on the left. And Algrim's like, okay. I don't think he's messing with me. So eventually, after they go on and after they kill a number of Asgardians, they make their way to the defenses of Asgard. And all of a sudden, we have all these heroes that are to be the alien ships are flying in and they're stealth invisible. Heimdall can't even spot them. And Heimdall has to like jump on one of the ships and dagger them down. Yeah. It gets really crazy. They bash through the Asgardian palace. It's crazy. So after we're to go on and have a number of Asgardians get killed, even a character that is to be a part of Odin's family, we then would go on to push this story into people needing to get revenge, that they're going to have to kind of go outside Asgardian law, create treason, because if anything, the ether needs to get out of Jane, as well as also we need to kind of push anyways to have this kind of convergence thing get as close as it can to the most dangerous possible stages that it can get. And Malekith has to get back the ether and eventually try to get as close as he can to become the all powerful being to really take out Thor. And it's quite funny how even Thor is like, man, with all the power that you got additionally to you, I thought you'd be a lot stronger. And he isn't. But Thor is always kind of make that joke about like that people should be bigger, should be stronger. It's always that kind of go-to where Thor is kind of like, come on, like give it your best shot. So, because eventually all the really good heroes, they are always like begging for it. It's like, come on, like come at me, bro. So eventually, while Thor is trying to face off against the Dark Elves by this third act, because he's gone on to eventually treason his way to have Jane get the ether released out of her, to then have to face off against Malekith and the Dark Elves. And Jane is then going on and using her spikes, her gravity meters that Eric has made while he's crazily, nakedly running around Stonehenge like a madman. And and we have it at one point where Thor turns to Eric, is like, why are you like like there's one point where like they go on and they ask Eric like, hey, how have you been? It's like, well, yeah, I had a god inside of me. And it's like, it's the weirdest, goofiest thing. But if anything, like Eric going on and doing this really wacky stuff like is really heavily making his character very much stand out. And from the fallout of Avengers and how he was brainwashed, like it does make a lot of sense that this guy's mind is just so banana. And Darcy even says it by the beginning of it, where he's like banana balls or whatever, is what she says about about Eric. So 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 we have the event which goes on and has all these all these dark elves start to disappear and end up in certain places. We all of a sudden also bring in a Jotunheim beast, or a frost giant beast that eventually we saw in the first movie that had the whole like uh Thor go through his like throat. It's this the same similar kind of one that they brought back for this movie because we just kind of have to connect things together. Like anything that was like a big thing from the other film, they're kind of re-bringing back in a very goofy, weird, funny way. Where the end credit scene is a frost giant beast that's going on and chasing all these birds flying around. Uh, Also, it's kind of funny how the birds just like fly up from underneath both Eric and Darcy, and Eric is like, "Well, yeah, it's reassuring to find out that the world is crazier than I am," and then he dumps all of his drugs into this trash can and he walks away. It's like, "Give me to Jane's lab." Uh, so we also, excuse me, we also have to kind of hodgepodgingly figure out a way to give like Jane a whole new other lab, because we can't do the same lab from New Mexico. Now she's branched out into London, so now she just has this like apartment place that's just kind of her lab in this movie. And so now they're kind of cramped in small quarters trying to figure things out. Um, as well as Eric had this huge blackboard and this in this either asylum of sorts or this kind of old folks home. I'm not quite sure which exactly. But anyways, so eventually all this comes to head with uh Malekith going on and saying like, "Well, hey, you can't destroy the ether." And Thor is like, "Well, you can." So eventually Thor figures out a way to outsmart Malekith and also use the spikes to start to separate him. And when separating him, separates the crisis, and eventually by the end of this story there's a bigger event looming, which is to find out that there is to be uh like a big event that's going to be leading into other Thor projects that is to be teased by the end of this, with characters that we've gone on to assume are dead are not, and see where they kind of play out for the rest of this film. And also eventually in Endgame we start to realize that kind of no one is really dead when you really think about it. um but either way, uh it is cool how we have at Endgame a lot of callbacks to this movie, how they go on and they say that this movie is important. And honestly, for Thor the Dark World, I don't feel like this is a bad movie, but I think a lot of people write it off as one. Yeah, the whole convergence thing and the amount of time it has to take to talk consistently about that gets really annoying. But outside of that, I think this is a really much better representation of Thor's world and how to really work these characters in the perfect way to have them be worked. Like specifically what we do with Loki in this film really I think plays to the real strength of that character. Be like, oh yeah, like of course he's gonna do all these pieces of things because it makes the most sense. Some people will go on and immediately uh not like the gag of Loki's character. I don't want to spoil much about this movie, but like the whole kind of running thing is just the fact that like how many times can we go and tease something for it to just be like, okay, how did he get out of it this time? How did like like how is it that he's still going on and being able to do these tricks and this and that. Yeah, like I guess that's but anything. Um, because that probably just sounded kind of dumb, just having me try to figure out how to talk about that. But yeah, everyone I think was like on playing to their strength of their character, and then eventually we'll go into Ragnarok after so many other projects have happened, and we'll bring in characters like Hulk, and there is to be a number of Avengers movies that have probably happened by that time. And all these things we have to kind of connect the pieces of the puzzle to and whatever. But at this point, I'm gonna wait a little bit for Ragnarok. Even though I do, and it arrived today. I do have the costume shirt for that, so great. That's gonna be a lot of fun to finally just be like, yeah, like every single one of these Thor things, I'm gonna try as best as I can. I don't know about Love and Thunder, but every one of these is going to have some kind of unique thing to it, but like so I'm going to try my best to try to definitely give some kind of one of a kind thing for the thumbnails. I'm going to try my best. I know that it's probably going to be like, man, I'm going to have to figure out how to keep going on and how to try to top myself, but it's just like, or do something different. um and that's getting a lot harder and a lot challenging, but if anything, I will feel that it's worth it. So, Thor Ragnarok to me, I think, is a better representation of Asgard and these characters. So, I would go on and I would say that Thor the Dark World, I'll go on and I'll say is. I'll say it's a great movie. I'll say it's a great film. I'll give that grading. Um, this one was to be surprisingly better than the last movie, obviously, because of just the constraints of just like we have to have Loki as the villain, obviously. And now this one, we actually go a wildly different direction, which is to bring in these dark elves and Malekith, and it's like okay, a little bit strange. Um, so I'm sure a number of people, because they'd be expecting some kind of normal way of characters that they're used to seeing in all the comic books. Like I would have liked to have hoped to have had at some point an enchantress, but it seems that we haven't ever going to have gone on to that direction, and at some point we probably never will. But that's fine. Um, because if anything, I can still go on and just be like, well, there's a number of animated things that have her in it, so I could be fine with that. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to go into full on spoilers and breakdowns of all this. This was an entertaining piece. I really did enjoy it, surprisingly. Um, man, honestly, if you probably would have gone on and had me talk about this when this movie first released, I probably would say that Thor was like way better than this film. But it's kind of weird how things have changed over the years. Like I've warmed up to this movie a lot more, and like I like that it's fun, goofy, and kind of does just some weird, wacky things inside of it. Uh, I think a lot of people could probably be bogged down by the whole portal thing and how this movie has to go on and bring up this whole convergence thing. I know a lot of people may not be won over by that, but I like this film. I definitely can say that. I definitely can thumbs up this, so I'm happy about that. There's a lot of superhero movies that are not always to be home runs or ones that I'd be like, man, I never want to see this again. But also, there'll probably be projects that I'll probably see in this channel again and cover it, uh, and then regret the fact that I have to go on it and do that task. Um, but if anything, it's all for the channel and it's all for going on and maybe thinking that maybe like I was wrong. Maybe I should just kind of watch this over again and just kind of second guess my opinions on things. But either way, because Thor: The Dark World is really a movie that I've really warmed up to, and I've really figured a way to a lot more enjoy it. So man, this is quite a bit of turnaround of this movie. Um, so with that said, I think it's about that time to get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to get into spoil this movie. Let me know in the comments below what is be your favorite Thor movie. If it's just the third one, or first one, I can understand. Um, some people may go on and also have their thoughts about the MCU of whichever films that they want to go on and talk about. Like also having Captain America in this movie was actually pretty cool because we're like finally like there's some commingling here. That's pretty cool as a Captain America cameo in this film, and having him in the Avengers costume, which we just saw that movie, is cool. All right, so so yeah. With that said, let's get into the full-on breakdown and spoilers of it all. I think it's about that time yet again. So, the very beginning of this piece goes on and has us to have Odin give this kind of intro of this movie, talking about the light and the darkness. Because, of course, besides the Dark Elves being the darkness, we would go on to have Malekith, who wants to bring darkness with him, and eventually it's to bring in this thing called the curse that eventually transforms his elves into a much more threatening bit of beings. So we'd come to find that there was a battle going on at the very beginning of this, which is to have been bringing in the prior Nine Realm Convergence event that eventually was against Malekith and King Bor. And as we'd go on to have King Bor start to take out a lot of dark elves, we would then go on to have Malekith call for one of the dark elves to become cursed so he can start to take out some Asgardians. But even that was not good enough. Malekith goes on and says, okay, we need to pull out all the stops, then I need to go on and make my way to the ether, and as soon as he does, all of a sudden, here bifrosts in a number of Asgardians to try and stop Malekith from getting to it. And so Malekith, realizing that at this point there's no way for them to go on and do anything but survive at this point. So Malekith and Algrim, with their remaining Dark Elves, realize that they just have to run and fight another day. Because at this point, this battle has been lost. And so, if anything, they now just have to escape. So, eventually we have one of the Asgardians that tells King Bor where to take, of course, the ether. And King Bor is to explain to them to bury it deep. And now we cut to modern day Asgard. So, Asgardian guards are bringing in Loki, and so he makes his way to Frigga and then goes on to make his way to Odin to seek out judgment. So, Loki goes on and says, hello, mother, have I made you proud? So, so Loki makes his way to Odin, and so Loki mentions about how he had wanted to go on and feel like he deserved to be having a throne somewhere. And Odin goes on to say to Loki, it's like, you didn't deserve that at all. If anything, you deserved to die. Like, you were to have originally been a Jotunheim child that could have been killed off, as well as any number of other frost giants. So, you don't really deserve anything. But for why you had gone on and decided to go to New York and try to do what you did anyways and kill all the people that you did. And so we'd go on to eventually, as Odin and Loki are having this back and forth, eventually Loki gets quickly tired of this conversation. It's like, you know what? Like, if I'm going to go on and deserve to get the axe, then if anything, just swing it. Like, just swing the axe and let this be over. It's not that I don't like these conversations, it's just that I don't love them. So, also, uh, Odin is going to explain to Loki that he will not be able to go on and be visited by the people that love him, even his mother, which Frigga will do that anyways, because she, of course, be mischief and use her magical powers to come to Loki and send him books. And as Loki is to be asking it, so, well, hey, where is Thor? Is Thor gonna end up being a king someday? And Odin's like, yeah, he will be king. As well as also, right now, he's going on and fixing what you had chaotically caused and trying to keep peace back to the Nine Realms. So now we cut to Vanaheim and what Thor is doing. So we cut to see Lady Sif, Volstagg, and a number of like the Warriors 3, Hogan, and Vangrel, which I think I keep butchering the name of in my mind because I just can't get it right. And fortunately, in this movie, we have a character that is recasted who is Vangrel, and he is now Zachary Levi. So if anything, that can get really confusing very quickly. So, so Fangrel, I think is his name. So so as all this fighting is going on, we all of a sudden see that there is to be a Bifrost coming down, and Thor appears, and Mjolnir comes flying into the air to take out a number of these Vanaheim people. Lady Sif is to turn to Thor. It's like, well, hey, I had everything covered. And Thor is like, well, why is everything on fire? So there is all of a sudden a break on everything. And there's people that are starting to part. And then all of a sudden, we come to find a character known as Cronin that comes in. A lot of people will probably get this confused with Korg from Ragnarok, because I think a lot of people were expecting this to be some kind of Korg character, because people were really kind of wanting that kind of character to appear, because a lot of people are, of course, to remember stuff like Planet Hulk and how effective that story actually was. And so when Cronin comes in, they're like, "Oh, is that kind of like the same character from Planet Hulk? Like, what's going on there? Is he kind of some similar?" Yeah. Every time there was to be a character that looked like this Cronin guy does. Like, man, they're going on making so many comparisons. And then when finally Core came, they're like, oh, yeah, this is finally who the guy that we were wanting from. Believe me, everybody was going on and always like assessing that, strangely enough. Because how everyone saw the Planet Hulk story and wanted to make visual comparisons. So as Cronin comes in, and while Thor and Lady Sif is fighting, there's at one point where Lady Sif takes her shield up and blocks Thor getting an arrow to him, and like, hey, you're welcome. So as Cronin comes in, we have Lady Sif that looks at Thor. It's like, yeah, that one's yours. Like, you take on the bigger ones. So yeah, because of course from the first Thor movie, it's like, oh, you're big, fought bigger. So Thor comes in there, looks at Cronin. It's like, meh, I accept your surrender. Ever the optimistic Thor is. And at this point, Thor is still a guy that hasn't lost a load of stuff. But eventually we'll get there within this film. Man, we'll get on to Thor's psyche and really that up. But anyways, so Thor goes on and just twiddles Mjolnir and hucks it into the air and takes out Cronin so easily, as if this is kind of like the Indiana Jones move where the guy has like the Arabian swords and does this whole dance thing, and then we have Harrison Ford that goes on, whips out the gun, fires him, and then ah! Like, it's kind of like that all over again within this scenario. It's like, yeah, we're not going to see that Thor is going to take his time with a guy like Cronin. No, like, it's just going to be this one hit done thing. Because if we were to go on and see him quite easily take out so many frost giants in the other film, this guy should be a piece of cake. So Fangirl goes on and tells Thor, it's like, well, yeah, maybe we should have started with the big one. Yeah, no, like, maybe it should have been Thor against the leader, and then, like, keep what you kill kind of thing. Where it's like, okay, like let's go on and let's just have two people be sent out and then just call it done there. Um, so so Thor goes on and speaks with Hogan because he knows that this is his specific realm. So Thor talks to Hogan about that there's close to being peace in all the nine realms, and if anything, Hogan should make his way back to this realm to be with his people, and then Thor calls out for Heimdall whenever he's ready. So now we make our way back to Asgard, as I guess now we can't remember what Asgard looks like at this point. But it's actually very nice that they have to go on and throw up a bit of words that says where the heck we're going, because I don't know how many times I've gone on to see other superhero content where they couldn't be bothered to do that now, could they? Hop from like 30 different places, and I'm just like, what the heck? I don't know. Where is this now? Like, what is this location? Why should I care? I don't know. Um, it's, believe me, it's so annoying, especially if it's something like a planet or if it's something outside of Earth. Like, I had gone on to like watch the very first Star Wars movie, and they're hopping from everywhere: Alderaans, Tatooines, Dagobahs, and all these other. I'm like, where are we going? Like, I have no idea. We're just going through all these things. All these places look like Earth. It looks like a sand place. I'm like, where are we going? Mos Eisley, you have to go on and explain that to me, but I'm like, I don't know where this is. Like, I'm so confused. Yeah. Um, but anyways, so it's nice to have a slapping of word that just says Asgard. I'm like, all right. I don't have to think about where this location is. So as we see all the Asgardians doing some practice fighting, because we aren't actually seeing them having to defend Asgard, which is weird. Uh, because I'm just so used to an Asgard that's like always under threat. Like I would always go on and see that they're having some skirmish of some kind all the time, every time. But I guess it's nice to also just see them practicing on fighting. So all of a sudden, this weird bird just goes onto just Odin's arm, and I'm just like, okay, is there some significance with this bird? Was there some thing that I should have gone on and figured out that this was like the bird of Odin, whatever this goofy name is? Because I'm like, I feel like I have to know every single name of every single thing, whatever. So Thor is to go on and give Odin the report of Vanaheim being secure, and Thor is to go on and say, like, well, yeah, I wish you were there. And Odin's like, am I a piece of bread that needs to be buttered? Because eventually we'll come to find that Darcy will go on and be talking to both Richard and both Jane, and she'll be buttering some bread. I'm like, well, is that a weird thing that they have to keep going on and talking about buttered bread for some reason? I don't know what that is. But so Thor is to go on and talk about the Bifrost being destroyed, which was from the first film, and now that it's just kind of a really sigh of relief that it seems that a storm is coming, but at least there's kind of a break. That if anything, that there's some downtime, and it's kind of just a nice change of pace. To where Odin's just like, well, yeah, like, you know what? If there's time to actually live your life, actually live it. Like, actually party like everyone else does, because you're not doing that. And Odin's like, well, yeah, I know that your heart is so torn because you haven't been with Jane yet. But if anything, like, instead of being your all father, I want to be your father and tell you, like, go out, be merry, like, party. Like, if anything, also, Odin is going on and saying, like, well, hey, like, there is a really good contender of a woman that's right in front of you, looking at Lady Sith as she's fighting people. Like, yeah, like, why aren't you going after her instead of a woman like Jane Foster? But we all know where that heads with the whole, like, Lady Sith. She eventually goes into being in Agents of Shield, and then she kind of disappears, and then we come to find her in Love and Thunder, and like, ooh, wow, that's a nice kind of catch up of where Lady Sith is and where her arm isn't, or something along those lines. Something happens with her, but anyways, so Odin goes on to tell Thor, it's like, embrace and freaking celebrate, like, you won something, like, party, freaking have a good time, be like a freaking Viking. Oh, by the way, I had just seen that the NFL had collabed with Disney, and the one, uh, what a weird coincidence. Of course, I live in Minnesota. Uh, we ended up getting Thor. I was like, Thor, really? But also, like, at least we actually got a decent character. There's some other NFL Disney stuff that looked really like, man, I'm lucky that I got Thor, because there's some other ones that got some really crappy characters. So I lucked out. So let me know in the comments below if you're from a different state, what Disney character you got from, or if you are to not even know NFL or football or whatever. Uh, Maybe you'll go on and you look at the NFL and Disney collabs, and you'll just have a fun time just looking at those visuals, I guess. Because I think they're all sold out anyways, because of course they are. But anyways, so that's a weird time capsule of when this is coming out. I try to avoid that, but whatever. But it's kind of weird coincidence. Thor and the place I live in. It's I guess it's telling me to check out Thor. So so Odin tells Thor to pretend to enjoy himself, and so what does Thor do instead of going on and and get drunk as a skunk or anything. No, he goes on and he like bathes himself, and then he looks outside, and then he goes partying, and he's just sitting around just watching everybody tell stories. And Volstagg is going on throwing his beer, another, like how Thor was in the first film. Like, it's so interesting how, like, when you watch the very first Thor film, like, Thor was everybody in Asgard, but now that he had went to Earth, all of a sudden Thor is very much different than who he was when he was in the first film. And how he would go on to be like, yeah, sustenance and uh and yes, I'd have another. And like, but now, like, Thor's to go on and kind of just not getting as drunk, going on, and like it feels like Thor has kind of grown a bit and eventually just kind of changed as a person. It's kind of a bit of interesting thing from the first movie to then this film. So after Thor is to go on and have a bit of fun around the table with all of his Warriors 3, he eventually then goes on and makes his way back to Lady Sith, where they're talking about celebrations and they're talking about the past and how Thor had to talk about how Sith had so much fun celebrating this battle at Herokin that eventually she almost started a second one. And Lady Sith is like, well, yeah, like the first one was so much fun that I just wanted another one. So Lady Sith is to talk about how so much of Thor's focus is on Asgard right now, and that if anything, there are other realms. Like, if Thor is wanting to be thinking nothing of Jane while going on and going through the motions of protecting and balancing everything uh, that he feels that he's supposed to do, he's not really doing what he wants to do, which is to be with Jane. Hopefully that made sense. So Thor goes on and thanks Sith for her sword and her guidance or her counsel. So now we make our way to London. So we find that Jane is on this date with a guy named Richard. And Jane is looking at a menu that doesn't have much on it. And eventually Richard calls her out on it. It's like, yeah, there must be some story with you because you're focusing so much on a menu that has nothing on it. And really, you haven't gone on and talked to me much. So it kind of feels that Jane really doesn't need to be on this date because, if anything, she's focused more on a prior commitment because she's still looking for Thor. So Jane goes on and talks about, yes, how she does have a prior relationship that's a little bit of long distance. I mean, crazy long distance. And Richard goes on to say, oh, yeah, like I've had one of those too. A girl that lived in New York and it just didn't work out because, if anything, she was sleeping around with other guys. So the more that Richard goes on and on about this story, all of a sudden Darcy comes in and interrupts and is to be looking at Jane and like, oh my god, Jane, you look really nice. And then like Jane is completely like not even understanding that this is a whole date, and Darcy does not give a rip. So Darcy interjects on the date, starts buttering this bread, and then just starts to talk to Jane about how this equipment is going off. The equipment that Jane hasn't really been paying attention to. And as Jane kind of starts to forget that she's even on this date and is telling Darcy, yeah, I'm on this date right now, get out of here. Eventually, Richard is to just be like, how about you just go with Darcy and just like, you gotta get this out of your system. Because when Jane starts looking back on her menu, she keeps calling out sea bass numerous times. And Richard is like, how about I myself go on and just say sea bass all by myself, all alone. You just go on and just go out with Darcy. You just go on and you just like figure out what she was talking about. So Jane runs off and goes into the car. All of a sudden, we come to find that Jane and Darcy are not alone. In the back seat, there's to be this new intern that Darcy hired, because if anything, Darcy, I guess, technically wanted a boyfriend character, but that seems for the MCU to not be a lasting thing. Because we'll come to find out that Darcy will seemingly in the MCU, via What Ifs, end up with Howard the Duck of all characters. And eventually have a child with Howard the Duck, which it sounds weird, but if anything, it does happen. So Darcy's relationship with Ian will be short lived, sadly. So as Jane and Darcy are driving, and Darcy is saying how like she's mastering how to drive through London, but really it's just Ian that's going on and GPSing, telling her where to go. So they're introducing Ian, but also Jane is also thinking about Eric and going on and calling him. So Jane calls Eric and goes straight to voicemail. Jane is to go on and say that she doesn't know where Eric is, and so Jane says like, "Well, hey, I'm calling because I'm onto something, but if anything, it seems like right now you've again vanished." All of a sudden on the news, we make our way to Stonehenge, and Eric is completely naked running around with these gravity meters because Eric is to go on and say that he thinks the best when he doesn't have pants on. So I guess him being completely nude is him going on and and thinking best, I guess. But also, uh, with Eric, I'm sure probably he's running around naked so no one will grab at him at a place where obviously he should not be going on, and putting these gravity meter spikes in a historical place like this anyways. But yeah, like if anything, this spot probably is even more so a tourist attraction than it probably ever was because of this movie. So that's kind of really nice that we have these kind of iconic areas that eventually will probably have a number of people dress up as Thor and appear at them and do some kind of photo shoot of some kind, which is kind of funny. So, or any one of the Thor characters, uh, any one of the Odins. Anyways, so eventually Eric does get grabbed and eventually has a number of security go on and arrest Eric. And the news eventually identifies Eric because of the whole New York event that he was to be tied to. And uh, so Darcy, Ian, and Jane make their way out of the car, and they're going to make their way to these kids. But Darcy's going on and telling Ian to get the phase meter. And it's the toaster looking thing. Stupid. So So as Jane walks up to the location, all of a sudden she ends up getting a ringtone and she can't figure out how to change her ringtone. And eventually the ringtone will come into to figuring out later because Jane will go on to have her ringtone go off like, oh yeah, like I'm getting reception here and I shouldn't. So like the ringtone will be important later on in the film. So Darcy goes on and says that she doesn't want to yell, so that's why she called her from like 20 feet away. It doesn't make sense. So they're all heading in this one direction, and Jane is kind of getting scared when she's starting to see other shadows of other people, and so she's like, "Hey, I don't want to get stabbed for science." So Darcy puts her hands up, says that they're Americans, and so as they keep walking, they meet up with a group of kids, and they ask if the girls and Ian are police, and they're like, "No, we're scientists." This is kind of like the Ghostbusters movie where Pete Venkman says, "Hey, we're scientists, man." So the kids go on and direct Jane and Darcy and Ian to what they had found. So they're like, "Hey, come with us." So we'd all of a sudden see this either truck or a van, and this one kid goes on and takes the bumper of this and starts to twist it, and the car actually starts to float in the air. It starts to rotate. And it's like, okay, that's strange. So they go on and they start doing things like hucking bottles in the air, and it starts going through these portals and starts looping. And then eventually, Jane is like, well, hey, I want to try this. She puts a can, and then all of a sudden it doesn't come back. And they say, yeah, sometimes it does come through, and sometimes it doesn't come back. So eventually, Jane is to be starting to look around as Darcy is wanting to use somebody's shoe to be hucked through this thing. And at some point, Ian makes the dumb decision about chucking his keys into the portal and it doesn't come back. Darcy looks at Ian's like, did you just chuck the keys in there? He's like, yeah, it didn't come back. So Darcy goes on and says these instruments haven't gone on to make these kind of calibrations or measurements since New Mexico, and she starts looking around, eventually leading her to be sucked into this portal, which eventually she gets like kind of forced into, and that leads her to the ether, where eventually as she starts looking around in this location, and eventually the ether goes inside of her, it goes like wrapping around her. Odin goes on to say how all of the other Infinity Stones are actually stone like, but the ether is actually different because it's actually liquid. And so, like, that's why the ether has to go on to be so differently done. But also, at some point, Thanos eventually gets the ether into his, of course, Infinity Stone because he collects them all. Because he collects them from the collector. Because we obviously see that in like Infinity Wars and such, that eventually he collects the stones so quickly. But anyways, so because that's how the story ends. So now on the Harrow, that's just kind of floating in this kind of meteor like located area. So Malekith is to be the first one that wakes up from his dormant slumber, and so Malekith goes on to explain to all the other dark elves that the convergence has returned and the ether has awakened them because it's obviously out there somewhere. So now we cut back to Asgard, and so Heimdall is talking to Thor, and as they go on and they try to figure out where Jane is, because Thor talks to Heimdall, and Heimdall's like, well, yeah, like Jane, it seems, is to be going on and to be kind of working on the same kind of thing that you are, like working on the convergence and looking into it and inspecting it. But then all of a sudden, Heimdall is to start looking, be like, huh? And then Thor is like, well, what? He's like, yeah, I can't see her. So Thor is to make his way back to Earth because Jane is to be taken over by the ether and then is to appear back in that warehouse, that area where all those kids were, and eventually gets back up and starts walking back out. Be like, hey, like Darcy, like, why have you called the police? And Darcy's like, well, you've been gone for like 5 hours. Like, I called the police because I was worried. And Jane is like, yeah, you should have never called the police. If you call the police, like the feds will get called. If the feds get called, Shield will get called. Then, if anything, like the only people that we had the most issues were 10-year-olds, and now you're escalating things. So Darcy explains to Jane that she's been gone for 5 hours and is like, oh, I guess that would make sense for why you called the police. Then all of a sudden, there's a bit of rain that is only in a certain circle of a place. So obviously, a uh, uh, a Bifrost was called. So all of a sudden, Thor appears from off the side and comes to meet up with Jane. So Jane goes on and slaps Thor. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I've been just dealing with a lot of crazy stuff. I just wanted to be sure that you were real. And then she goes on and slaps him again. It's like, well, hey, you promised that you would have seen me. And so, like, I was waiting, I was crying, like, I didn't think you were ever coming back. So, Thor goes on to explain it to Jane that, like, well, yeah, the Bifrost was destroyed. It took us forever to get kind of back to be able to get back to hopping anywhere. But also Jane goes on and briefly brings up New York, and so Thor goes on and says, like, well, yeah, like all the realms were in chaos. Like, I had to put everything back into order. That's what took so long for me to get back to you. And but if anything, Thor has realized that fate is to bring them back together now. And so now they're so close to almost kissing, and Darcy appears and kind of ruins the moment. But eventually, once they get to Asgard, both Jane and Thor will have their private kissing session. So, so Darcy explains to Jane how there's a possibility that they'll get arrested, and so Jane has to kind of clear things up with the police. And here's where Darcy and Thor, like, how is space? And Thor's like, space is fine. It's like, why are they talking about space? Like, if anything, I know that Chitauri was a space threat, but like if anything, I'm like Avengers, space, like, what am I missing here? I guess if you think about it, like, I guess you could say that, like, with Thor kind of hopping from everywhere he hops to, like, there is kind of like an element of possible space, but like, I'm trying to figure out why exactly Darcy was to have said that. But maybe draw some conclusions of maybe Darcy didn't really know what was going on with Thor, so it's just like, space. So, because maybe she had no clue about what was going on really in Avengers. So, Jane makes her way to this police officer, and so the police officer starts talking about how Jane was technically trespassing, and eventually, as the police try to arrest her, all of a sudden there's this defensive measure that comes in. Jane is to fall into the ground. Thor is to check up on her, and Thor goes on and is to explain to everybody that if anything, Jane is coming with him, and if anything, even though Jane is dangerous, so is he, and so he's gonna go on and figure out what is wrong with Jane and help her. So immediately he goes on to make his way to Asgard, where finally Jane can go on and meet up with characters like Heimdall and all these other Asgardians. And also, it's quite funny because eventually, at some point in Love and Thunder, both Jane and Heimdall will go on and meet up again. And that'll be an interesting conversation that the two of them will eventually have. But anyways, so Heimdall goes and welcomes Jane to Asgard. It's like, okay, whatever. So now we cut to Savart Elfheim, Savart Elfheim, Svartalfheim. If anything, whenever I bring up this place in the future, I'll probably call it just Savart, just to condense that down, because I'm sure I'm going to be butchering that name throughout this entire thing. So whenever I say Savart, believe me, I'm talking about this realm. So, so now we're back with the Dark Elves. So we have a point here where where Malekith is talking about reclaiming the ether, and Malekith is realizing how all the dark elves within this realm that he used to be in are all dead now, and that if anything, it's all about like, well, hey, like, I guess just our survival will end up being a legend that eventually more dark elves will sing about someday, and we'll eventually have our legacy just simply be that eventually will be remembered by the by bringing back the dark elves uh to real promise. So now we cut back to Thor at Asgard, who is to have a number of Asgardian uh doctors and nurses. Like we have a one Asgardian that I believe is either Higher or Here. EIR. I'm gonna go with Here because I don't know what they said in this movie. EIR. Ire. I'm gonna go with Ire. Let's go with Ire. I'll see if that works. So Ire is to go on and eventually uh put Jane through the Soul Forge, and the whole time we have Jane that is saying like, well, isn't this a quantum field generator? And Ira is like, no, it's a Soul Forge. And Jane goes on to say exactly what this thing does. And Ira is like, well, yeah, that is what it does. And she's like, well, that's exactly what I said. It's a quantum field generator. So Odin comes in and eventually is to bicker with Thor, and Jane is to turn to Odin. It's like, well, who the heck are you? It's like, well, I'm Odin. And then she's like, oh, all right. Well, now that I know who you are. So here's where Thor goes on and talks about how Jane is just immortal and that she should be left to Midgard doctors and not here. And so Odin also knows exactly who Jane is. And so eventually, as some Asgardians start to pick up Jane because they're going to take her out of there, here's where the ether starts to defend itself. So Odin goes on and takes Jane's arm and starts to have a look at it and realizes, like, oh. So Odin goes on and brings both Jane and Thor to uh, the relics that predate the universe itself. And so they talk about how the Nine Realms had a dawn, and they're showcasing it in this room. So Odin goes on and pops off the book of the Dark Forest, the Dark Elves, and how at one point they were a threat that was unchallenged. So the Dark Elves wanted to go on and steal the light, and Thor is to be very familiar with these stories. So Malekith was to have been the one that wanted to go on and wanted to bring forth the darkness and bring forth a element called the ether. Again, eventually going on and saying how this ether is to be more liquid than the stones we're used to seeing in other infinity stones. So Father Boar of Odin was to have gone on and triumphed over the Dark Elves and eventually wiped them all out. And so, as Thor and Jane ask Odin, it's like, well, do you think that there's any Dark Elves left? And Odin's like, no, my father killed every single one, as if he's very sure of it. So, Jane goes on and asks if there's a possibility that the ether can be brought out of her, and if there's an answer in that book. Nope. So, now we cut back to Malekith, who's talking to Algrim. And so Algrim is going to have to disguise himself as a prisoner. And so they take one last bit of curse that they have available. They cut it into Algrim's body to hide it from anyone. And so Malekith is explaining to Algrim how the curse will work and how it'll probably consume him. But if anything, also, like, it'll ensure their victory for him going on and becoming this cursed and making his way through Asgard, because none of the normal Asgardians can touch him. So, right after that, we then have Volstagg and I think Fangirl that make their way with a number of prisoners from Vanaheim. And it seems that Algrim is to come along with them. So, while those prisoners pass, we'd go on to then see Loki, who is eventually talking to Frigga. So, in this bit of conversation, Frigga is going on and asking Loki, like, well, hey, have I brought enough books for you to read? And so 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 Loki is to go on and talk about how he hates his family and how he hates um his mother and father, and how they're not his real true mother and father. And Frigga is like, oh, so is that how you feel about me? That I'm not your true mother? So Also, we then go on and have Jane and Thor. They cut away from everybody, and Thor starts to talk to Jane about the whole event of the convergence, and talks about it as very lucky that they were able to have this convergence event going on, or Thor would be able to have lost connection with Jane, or not to have been able to have gone on and figure out where Jane was because of this whole like event not going on. So eventually, as Thor goes in depth again about the whole convergence thing, about bringing all the nine realms into one spot, at some point both Jane and Thor kiss because Jane is to like how Thor explained the whole event back over again. So all of a sudden, here is when Frigga comes in to meet up with Jane and Thor. And so now uh, Thor can introduce Jane to his mother, and then Jane is like, "Oh well, I gotta clean myself up for Thor's mother. Like I didn't know I was meeting her right now." So as Loki is now throwing his cup in his prison cell, having nothing better to do, we now have Algrim that is to rip the cursed object out of his body and now inject him with it. And now he's starting to become cursed, and all the prisoners are being very afraid of him, and they're not sure what's going on. So Algrim is now to have been the curse. So I think for here on out, I will call him that because there's no one else that ends up getting cursed in this movie. So if anything, it's better to call him cursed than Algrim in this entire piece because it's a lot easier. So Cursed goes on to eventually shove this prisoner against this force field, and then the Cursed punches it and breaks the force field. So Curse goes on and starts attacking the guards, easily taking them out by just touching them, and it drains them of their essence, their life essence. So the Cursed goes on to start freeing all the other prisoners by tearing through the force fields and then eventually landing onto Loki. And he does not want to free Loki, but Loki goes on and tells him, "Hey, yeah, you might want to take the stairs to your left." And the curse is like, "Huh, I don't know if I should trust him or not." But he walks off, doing exactly what Loki says. We have the Asgardians that run to protect the dungeon, and so they're getting ready to face off against the cursed. I think we have some of the Warriors 3 that are also starting to get there, like Volstagg and Fengrel, that are trying to get back the prisoners back into their cells. Fengrel goes on and says, like, "It seems that these people are very resistant to being imprisoned," or something along those lines. So, uh, where Volstagg is like, "Yeah, there's no policing these people." So, Thor makes his way also down there, where he's going on and he's telling everybody to return to their cells, and he has his word that, or he has his word that he won't hurt them. But it seems that as they start to attack Thor, it's like, "Well, hey, you don't have my word though," so he starts attacking other people. So Odin goes on and meets with both Jane and Frigga and tells them that this is a small skirmish, that it won't really be anything of anything to really be stressed out about or sweat about or whatever. It's going to be easy. And so if anything, like Frigga worries, and so uh and it's all because she worries so that way Odin will always survive. So So Frigga goes on and tells Jane to do exactly as she says. And so now we cut to uh, so Heimdall is now at the Bifrost Bridge. All of a sudden he's going on, he's sensing something, he jumps out to the bridge, runs from the highest point of the bridge, jumps to this invisible ship, starts stabbing in it, takes it down, but realizes that there's just more ships coming. There's more Harrows coming. So eventually these Harrows start to invade Asgard as these gunners are trying to blast down the Harrows, but as they start coming, eventually we have these skiffs that are to be the Asgardian ships that are trying to fight off these Harrows. But it all comes down to this. So Heimdall starts to make a defense mechanism that brings in the shield, which I'm kind of curious where that was when it was like Ragnarok's and all these other things. I guess that it's still broken from this movie. I don't know what. But anyways, so as Heimdall goes on and puts this shielding up, here's where the curse comes in, sees this ball or this shield generator of this gold, punches this circle, and completely breaks down the shield barrier to where all these Harrow ships can start crashing through and start blasting through the Asgardian palace, taking out some Asgardians in its way. As one of the Harrows crash into the palace, we then start to see that some Dark Elves start to make their way to face off against the Asgardians and starts taking them out. We then find Malekith is on one of these ships, and he immediately finds the Throne of Odin and uses a black hole grenade and destroys it. As well as also there's a number of black hole grenades that are taking out Asgardians, because of course there are. So as Loki is having nothing able to do but just watch as other people are just scrambling around, we have Odin that is to start looking around at all the people that are starting to die as he is to go on and take one of the Dark Elves out and realize that more than likely that Frigga may be in jeopardy, and so he's running to her. So now we cut to Frigga and Jane. So Malekith has now made his way to Frigga, and so now Malekith is claiming that he wants back what is his, and eventually as Jane and Malekith start sparring, at some point Frigga goes on and takes a blade to Malekith, but then all of a sudden the curse comes in and grabs Frigga and starts to take control of her. Malekith starts to make his way to Jane, and as he gets close to her, all of a sudden we find out that Jane isn't really there. That if anything, Frigga has used her power to make Jane look like she's there, but she's really not. She's in hiding. So Malekith goes on to obviously ask Frigga where Jane is, and Frigga won't give the answer. So Malekith kills Frigga and drops her, to where both Malekith and the Cursed run off as Thor is chasing after them, hawking his Mjolnir, just missing them by just that much. And Malekith and the Cursed have now landed their way onto one of these ships, and they're making their way off. And as Thor is chasing after it, like, he just can't get there in time. So to all he has left to do, no, wait. So Thor goes on and tries to chase after them, but then realizes that he hucks his Mjolnir. So that's what he was trying to huck at the ship, but it vanishes away. So he couldn't figure out where they were. So that's what I was talking about. Not Thor flying away, Mjolnir flying away. So Odin goes on and makes his way to Frigga, and then they have a funeral for Frigga. Everyone goes on and looks at Odin, and then they all start to fire off flame torches. We see one Asgardian guard fire off one. Then there seems to be a number of uh, of of fired flames that all come flying. We have the skiff that goes on through the water, and then all of a sudden like goes off to space, and then the essence of all this just kind of appears into the air, and then all of a sudden we see all these glowing orbs. So an Asgardian guard goes on to explain to Loki what had happened to Frigga, because evidently Loki or Odin couldn't have been bothered. So Loki, I think, is kind of upset by him probably feeling responsible about the death of his mother, because it is kind of true. Loki is the reason why his mother is dead. So Loki goes on and uses his magic powers to blast all the furniture around, and then eventually we'll come to find that Loki is even more distraught by destroying every piece of his furniture within his cell, as he reveals himself truly to Thor, as all of his furniture is really destroyed. So now we cut back to Eric, who is going on and explaining the whole convergent event and going on and talking about these two shoes, and how if one shoe is to have to be on top of another, how like one shoe is going to easily be passing through one another unscathed or untouched, and that's how all the nine realms should be, with the help of Eric having these gravity meters that are going to go on and not tear the realms apart, but if anything, have them be well balanced so they can easily make it through the transition of all these nine realms being in one place at the same time. And Eric goes on to explain all this in full, and then goes on to ask if anybody has any questions. And Stan Lee ends up going on to like, yeah, Excelsior. No. He says, can I get my shoe back? Because no one really cares about any of this. So, plus also we're almost like an hour and almost an hour and a half in. Wow. So I'm really trying to cover a lot of ground here. So, uh, as I slow down here for a second. So the curse is going on and telling Malekith back in the ship that he needs to heal up, because that battle took a lot out of him for what little he really did. But anyways, so, but if anything, like, it's all to prep for when he has to kind of really put forth a real effort when the convergence is becoming. So Jane, Jane is in hiding. So she eventually goes on and makes her way and looks outside, to eventually have the ether really starting to take control of her. As she's looking outside, and the ether is like coming to her in this vision, and then all of a sudden we see Jane's eyes are black, and so at some point we now have Odin that is talking over with Fengrel about the kind of the state that they're in right now. So Fengrel is saying how, like, at odds that they are, that like they're up against a threat that can easily invade Asgard because they're completely defenseless, and that also, like, they can attack at any time and they would never know because they have ships that they can't see. Not even Heimdall can. And so basically like really showing how, like, if Asgard would seem to have been at its top of its game, man, how things have really changed. So, so Thor goes on and starts talking to Odin, and they don't really want to argue here, but if anything, there's the talk about pursuing Malekith, and so Thor goes on and explains his plan to Odin about, hey, yeah, I'll go and I'll take Jane to the Dark World because we have to figure out a way for Jane to get separated from the ether, and if we can separate Jane from the ether, Thor goes on to explain how he'll figure out a way to destroy the ether and not have it go to Malekith. And so and so Odin goes on to say, it's like, well, if you make that plan, there's also a possibility that Malekith will take the ether and then become very powerful. We can't take that risk. And give the weapon into the hand of the enemy. So Odin goes on to explain how he's completely letting no one go in or out from the Bifrost. That's basically been cut off now. And if anything, what they're just going to be expecting to do is waiting for a threat to come to Asgard, and with every breath and every last one of them, they're going to fight this. And that's Odin's plan. So, and Thor is asking, how exactly are we going to be any different than Malekith? And Odin's like, well, the difference is we're going to win. That's the only difference. That's the only thing Odin cares about, is winning. So now we cut back to Darcy and Ian. So now Darcy's going on and calling Eric, or just trying to figure out who she can get a hold of. Because at this point, she's just trying to figure out what the next move is. Like, what should she be doing now? So, as Darcy's calling Eric, Ian is watching the television, realizing, like, wait a minute. Like, there's some guy named Ian that had been scrambling around at Stonehenge bare butt naked. Darcy, who did you say that Eric guy was? What was his last name? So, eventually, Darcy and Ian will be making their way to wherever Eric is being held and free him by Ian pretending to be Eric's son and going on and figuring out a way uh, to get him released. And so Eric is going on and just hugging on to Darcy and 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 just trying to eventually find that things outside, when Eric starts to go out, it are starting to act very crazy. There's going to be a number of birds that are going in a weird, strange direction, but then all of a sudden appear from underneath them and they freak out. And then here's where Eric goes on to say, like, well, yeah, it's comforting to know that the world is a lot crazier than I am. So, so he hucks the medication, and he's like, okay, where is Jane's new lab? So, Thor goes on and speaks with Heimdall, and so Heimdall is going on and just sitting at this table and not anywhere at the Bifrost, because if no one's going in or out, and that the Bifrost is now closed off to everyone. There's no reason for Heimdall to be guarding anything right now. So Thor's be asking Heimdall for help, and Heimdall is like, well, like, you're not the king. Odin's the king. Like, I'm not going to go on and I'm not going to do anything against my king's wishes. And Thor is like, well, I'm not asking you to. So Thor tells Heimdall that it's like, well, if anything, Odin's not thinking of a strategy that I've thought of. And Heimdall, if you're willing to come and listen to this strategy, like maybe this whole plan will actually work out. And if anything, like Odin is just kind of having his judgment very clouded because of Frigga's death. And so maybe us coming up with this plan will be uh taking a risk. But if anything, Heimdall is like, well, it's better than nothing. So Thor goes on and scrambles all of the Warriors 3 and Lady Sith to him so he can drop this whole plan. So Thor goes and says how risky this plan is and how they'll probably be uh, given or they'll be forced to be prisoners of treason because this is basically going up against Odin's wishes. So let me pause here a second. All right, so Thor's play is the fact that Malekith can sense where the ether is. If anything, Malekith had woken up from his ship because of the ether's presence. So, and also knowing that the convergence was near anyways. So, Thor's to say, how about we use the ether as bait to get the ether and Malekith in one place and be able to take it out in one shot. So, Thor goes on to say that they will be able to make their way to Zavart without using the Bifrost, and there's only be one person that knows a shortcut to get there. Heimdall says that there's a few, but Thor says there's only one, and it ends up being none other than Loki. So Thor goes on and makes his way to Loki's cell, and Loki's like, "Oh, you finally showed up to visit me, Thor." so Thor is like, "Okay, Loki, no more illusions," and then we show like a disheveled man and this and that. So Loki asks if Frigga suffered, and Thor is like, "Well, hey, like, if anything, I don't have a lot of time. Like, I don't have time for this. Like, there's bigger things going on here." So Thor goes on and says, like, "Well, hey, like, if you come with me on this mission, like, you'll seek out your vengeance. You'll go on and you'll get back at the people who killed our mother." So if anything, Loki is saying, like, well, hey, you must be truly desperate to come to me for help. And Thor goes on to say, it's like, well, hey, if you betray me, I will kill you. And at some point, Thor is to say, no matter how many times that they fought one another so far now between Thor and Avengers, Thor never gave up hope that Loki was to still be the brother that he knew and a person he could somehow trust. But if anything, eventually Loki is to say, trust my rage, eventually later on. So, as Loki and Thor are now roaming around Asgard, and like Loki's on cloud nine, and he's all like, he's freaking strutting, and if anything, like Thor is just like, man, we gotta keep a low profile because if anything, I'm walking around with Loki, people kind of be like, what the heck is going on? So Loki is like, well, hey, like, if you want to be more inconspicuous, Thor, that I'll go on and I'll swap and I'll end up being one of the Asgard guards, and then all of a sudden Thor switches to then be Lady Sith, and then all of a sudden we switch back to then have Loki go on and say, it's like, well, hey, like, how about I go on and how about I give you more comfort by being one of your newest allies? And then he turns into Captain America, and he talks about how he feels a bit of righteous and a righteousness surging through him, and if Thor would like to take some time to talk about a discussion of truth and justice in the Miracle Way or something like that. So Thor is going on and just getting more and more upset that Loki is just joking around and making a lot of noise while they're trying to be discreet here. So finally, as Loki turns back to his normal self, Loki asks if Thor is going to give him a weapon. And Thor is like, oh yeah, I'll give you a weapon. I'll give you cuffs. and then Loki's like, you cuff me. And Thor is like, yeah, you're not the only one that can do tricks. So 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 now we're going on, and so since we're going to be delivering Jane on a silver platter to Malekith, it looks like there has to be some way to make this look a lot better. That if anything, people of Malekith are going to be seeing this coming from a mile away. So how are they going to really pull this off? And so as Loki and Thor make their way uh to eventually Jane, and Jane slaps Loki because of New York, then Lady Sith goes on and meets up with Loki and goes on and says like, well, hey, if you betray him, I'll kill you. And then eventually, as they continue to keep going through, and Thor and Loki keep meeting up with people like uh like all the other Warriors 3, it's like, yeah, if you betray him, and then Loki's finally like, yeah, I get it. You'll kill me, right? Like that seems to be the thing that everyone else is saying. So Heimdall is now bringing Odin and some Asgardian guards to him, and Odin is saying to Heimdall, it's like, well, hey, it seems that you've gone on to call me here for a thing of treason. And Heimdall is to say, yeah, like, I'm gone on to say that I am to have been accusing myself of treason, and he hands over his sword. And Odin's like, like something's going on here, and Heimdall has just dragged me here so I would be distracted. So, so Odin is scrambling the guards to get to Jane before she goes missing. So, so what their plan is that Thor is going to go on and get the Harrow ship that crash landed in the Asgardian palace and escape from that. But then, as they get into the ship and as they're trying to figure out how to fly it, and it's kind of funny how Loki is going on and telling Thor, it's like, well, hey, how about you have me fly it? And Thor is like, well, out of the two of us, who is to be the one who actually can fly? So, if anything, Thor should be a better pilot than Loki should be. So, Volstagg goes on and is to be a distraction so that way Thor can get away off this Harrow ship. So Volstagg goes on and starts to battle against these Asgardians, but they start to all compile around him, and then he gets overtaken and he gets fallen. He falls to the ground. He gets kind of pushed to the ground. So as the ship flies off, eventually, as Jane is to fall over, and Loki ends up asking Thor, "Is like, is she dead?" It's like, no, she's just tired. So eventually, as more and more Loki continues to argue with Thor for how Thor is a horrible pilot, he keeps crashing through these statues of his grandfather and bashes his way through Asgard, and is to do all of these things in the most unstealthiest way possible. And so, the more and more that Loki is to be bickering with Thor, finally Thor goes on and hucks Loki, and we're like, what the heck happened there? Then all of a sudden we come to find that Thor grabs Jane, jumps onto a skiff, and Fangirl's there. And so now Thor is telling Loki, hey, go on and get to that secret location that you know so well of. And Fangirl goes on and jumps off the skiff, and then is going on to one of the Asgardian other skiffs and try to take all the Asgardians down. Of like, hey, don't take this personally. I just need to knock you out because you're trying to go on and you're trying to get to Thor and you're trying to stop the ship. So, or Fendril. Fendril. This name is so hard to remember. So, so at some point when Loki is to get to this secret spot and Thor is like, "Hey, like, are you crazy? Like, are you sure that you're gonna do this right?" And Loki says, "Yeah, if it was easy, anyone would do it. But also, like, yeah, it has to be like a difficult thing, so that way it kind of builds suspense here." So they end up in Savart, and so as Malekith is to be told about that they should probably strike against Asgard, Malekith is to say that his to his dark elves that he can sense that the ether is nearby in Savart. So so if anything, both Loki and both Thor here are talking about Jane, and Loki wants Jane's power, and Thor says that Loki shouldn't have it. Um, there would be the wrong person to have that kind of power. So me pause for a second. Trying to figure out where to go with this dialogue. But also about talking about their differences. And all this is still going to come back to Frigga and how she's now dead. And how Thor had kind of won over Frigga's trust, whereas Loki got all of her skills and her tricks. And eventually, Loki is to talk about how he was to have been imprisoned, and Loki is like, well, yeah, you put yourself there. And as they start to fight, Thor realizes like this is a mistake that they are fighting, because if anything, like they're kind of on the same side right now. Loki says that if anything, like they shouldn't be surprised that if anything they're fighting, because they're always fighting. And Thor goes on and says like, well, I wish I could trust you. And here's where Loki goes on and says, trust my rage. So now we cut to the Darcy Ian part, where they're trying to regain Ian, and they're getting all of his stuff, like all of his wallet and his medication, and then the gravity meters. So Eric comes in, hugs Darcy, and Eric's like, well, how did you guys find me? It's like, well, yeah, we saw you naked on TV. So Eric goes on to be like, okay, I need to find my pants and let's get out of here. So Ian introduces himself, and then that's where we get the whole thing of Eric talk about how he had a god in his brain, and so that's why he went a little banana. So they realize, if anything, the equipment is starting to beep, and Eric is to state that yeah, the equipment is starting to calculate, and here's where we start to realize that things are starting to go very wacky, and portals are starting to appear out of nowhere when we start to see these birds thrusting into the underneath of both Eric and Darcy and Ian. So now we cut back to Savart. So now Loki, Jane, and Thor make their way to Malekith, and so now we're at a point where this plan is going to have to come into motion. But there's a whole thing of element of like a factor in of like Loki, like what is he really going to do? So as Loki is to finally be given a weapon, it seems. So Loki goes on and starts attacking Thor and slices off his hand as Thor tries to reach for Mjolnir, and Loki starts beating him up. So Loki goes on and hands Jane to Malekith and calls it a gift to say that all Loki wants in return is to see Asgard burn. So Malekith goes on and is to tear out the ether from Jane, and Thor calls out for Loki now. Loki gets his arm back after Malekith has to go on and kind of kick Thor and look at him, and so Thor goes on and takes Mjolnir as Loki goes on and grabs Jane and protects her. So Thor goes on, takes Mjolnir, blasts the ether, but the only problem is the ether explodes, but the ether is an infinity stone. It's a very powerful thing. So Eventually, the ether just is to break it in a number of pieces, but then is to reform back again, to where eventually it just goes right back into the place that it was meant to be, anyways, which was Malekith, as he was to have been the one that was trying to obtain it, anyways. So Malekith now has the ether inside of him, and so now we start having within the story where there's a battle going on with the cursed and Thor and Loki, as Malekith uh, is going on to make his way onto Midgard, onto Earth, to plan himself for the whole convergence thing. So, so what happens here is that Loki and Thor are facing off against the cursed. So, what happens here is that Thor is facing the cursed, and at some point, the curse goes on and takes this huge boulder and hucks it at Thor, and like Thor braces himself. So the curse is really tearing into Thor, and then all of a sudden Loki comes in, as even Mjolnir like doesn't phase the curse. He like bats Mjolnir away. So Loki is going on facing off all against these dark elves, and then stabs the cursed with this dark elf sword, and then eventually the curse turns to Loki, stabs into Loki's chest. Loki falls over, and so Loki is to say to the curse, "I'll see you in hell," because all of a sudden the black hole grenade has now been set on this monster to have killed him. Thor goes on and is to hover over Loki's body and is to explain to Loki, it's like, well, hey, I'll explain, Father, what you did. Um, and Loki says, I didn't do it for him. Eventually, we'll come to find later that this whole scene will be redone over again in a play, and Odin will go on and say the exact same lines that Loki said before about like I didn't do it for him, and then Thor's like no, yeah, like it's really funny in Ragnarok them recreating this scene. It's kind of a funny bit. So, uh, so Loki supposedly dies here, but we know better. Uh, we know that he lives. Obviously, by the end of this tale, we find out that he is to actually be Odin, and they swap places. And eventually, Loki is to find a way to hide away Odin, and we'll find out in Ragnarok that that'll be to Odin's detriment. Because when both Loki and Odin find Odin, Odin will be close to being dying. Because eventually, when uh, uh, Hela comes to appear, yeah, like Odin is basically done at that point. So, but if anything, I'll get to that when I get into Ragnarok. Like I'll kind of keep that close to the vest to talk more about Ragnarok later on. So now Jane and Thor realize that there's no way back from where they came, that they're kind of stuck at Savart, while while Malekith is going on Earth to do his whole thing with the convergence. So, as Jane and as Thor make their way through Savart, and this area kind of seems very similar to, God, was it Avengers? At some point, Eric goes on and has Thor go to this place where he goes into this water and he gets these visions. Um, I'm not quite sure which movie that is. But yeah, like he goes to a very specific place that kind of looks very much like this, and he ends up getting visions about what's to come. But anyways, if anything, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm sure there's an Avengers movie, there's something going on where that kind of connects with that I don't remember where that is. Anyways, let's push on here. So, as Jane and Thor are trying to figure out, okay, how do we get out of here? All of a sudden, Jane's phone goes off and it's a call from Richard. Richard is going on and talking about their date last night, and Jane is just like, well, yeah, like, if anything, she just wants to keep Richard on the line. So Jane is telling Richard, yeah, just keep talking to me. And Richard's like, okay, all right. Like, I must be really winning over this girl. So that way she wants to talk to me more. So, come to find out that's not really what she wants. So, eventually, as Jane is to be incredibly, like, surprised about how she's even getting reception within a different realm. And eventually she finds her car keys and she finds the things that she dropped uh, from that area that she was in before, that warehouse with those kids. So at some point they finally do find a portal. They make their way back to London, and both Jane and Thor get into Jane's car, and Thor turns to Jane, is like, who is Richard? So Jane and Thor make their way back to Jane's lab, and so here's where now Thor is gonna go on and meet up with all the people that he hasn't seen in 2 years. Well, maybe not Eric, because Eric was technically a part of the Avengers, but still. So as Eric goes on and starts hugging Jane, Jane goes on and notices, Eric, you're not wearing any pants, and he's like, and so Ian's like, well, yeah, it helps him think. So all of a sudden, Eric goes on and starts hugging Thor, and Eric's like, please don't tell me your brother is coming. And Thor tells Eric, it's like, no, Loki's actually dead. And so Eric is just like, oh, well, like, uh, thank God. It's like, oh no, I'm very sorry. And then he, like, Eric goes on and hugs him, and he's like smiling, like weird, like, and like crazy, like. And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry. So Loki is to go on and change into a Asgardian guard to make his way back to Odin and explain that they had done some investigating in the Dark World, and they found that they had found a body, and Odin is like, don't tell me it's Thor. And it's like, no, it's someone else. It's like, oh, it's Loki. And the guard is like, hmm. So we'll come to find that Odin is to eventually make his way with this guard to eventually be surprise attacked by Loki off screen, and eventually Odin will go into hiding after that to eventually have Loki then beat Odin, and that's the big surprise by the end of the film. That while Odin is going on and talking to Thor, it'll be Loki the whole time as Odin, which is kind of funny. So Rodin talks about how one son wanted the throne too much and another didn't want it at all. So here the team is scrambling together to try to figure out where is the best guess of where Malekith is going to, within all the 9 realms, actually be. And eventually Eric is to come to the conclusion that he has gone on to figure out all these different places, and that he's going to triangulate them all on this map, and eventually that will lead them to uh Greenwich. That's the mandala, or that's the signature point that all these places have a connection with. So so Jane starts to talk about how the place that they're going of Greenwich will probably be the key place, and there's going to be a number of factors going into this location, and where gravity could increase or decrease, and all these other weird factors. And so Erica's like, well, I better get my pants on. So as they make their way to Greenwich, both Jane and Darcy are pulling out these gravity meter spikes, and they have no idea how it really works, but they're having to put it in certain locations for reasons that they don't quite understand, because this movie doesn't explain things very well of why they need to do these or how these things are to really work, but they're supposed to be things that they need to just do anyways. So as Darcy and as Ian are going on and plopping down these spikes, all of a sudden the hero, like, biggest ship is crashing its way through the place that Darcy and Ian are putting up this spike. So Ian and Darcy run off here. So this elevator goes on and brings Malekith out to Greenwich. And so here is where he's met by Thor. So so Malekith is going on and saying to Thor how his world and everyone that he loves will go on and be extinguished. And as that's going on, as Thor is trying to face off against Malekith and he's getting blasted by the ether, we have Jane and we have Eric that are going on with this handheld to hope that Darcy's going to go on and put all the spikes in certain places, so that way they can be able to use the gravity meters as a way to even the odds with Thor by going on and having these dark elves appear in some other random places or some other random realms. And also have random things of other realms come here by accident, because the Bifrost or the frost giant beast is to be one random thing from Jotunheim that comes and appears here and just starts willy nilly just starting to attack some dark elves. So so here's where Thor goes on and says that, you know what, with all those powers, I thought you would have hit it, you would hit harder. So Darcy and Ian finally go on and put the last marker, and so Jane is excited. So if anything, now Eric and Jane realize that they have to keep Malekith distracted for 8 minutes, because if anything, the convergence will all commence within 7. So Jane starts to use her handheld device to start to have these dark elves appear in other places, and then uh, Darcy's all excited about how Jane is doing this, and then Darcy's hoping that Jane is going to explain all this. But then all of a sudden, some dark elves appear where both Ian and Darcy are, so they kind of have to run away here. So Malekith and Thor continue to fight to a point to where Malekith thrusts Thor, and he crashes through through the tops of these buildings. Jane and Eric are running off, and then eventually they're telling a number of these people in this library that they also need to get out of this area because there's a fight going on. And this guy turns to Jane. It's like, excuse me, like, you want us to miss a fight with Thor going on outside? And then all of a sudden, all these windows all break. It's like, well, yeah, like, I bet you're kind of regretting that decision to not get out of here. So, so Thor and Malekith, they start fighting all over the place, different realms. They keep going from London to eventually Savart to eventually, like, they go from a top of a building. They're fighting around a bridge. They're going on and they're falling off of a building. The whole entire time, Thor is keep grabbing out for Mjolnir, and Mjolnir is having to go all over the place to try to get to Thor. And then once he keeps hopping from different realms, like Mjolnir is just flying all over the place like crazy to get to Thor. At some point, there would be fighter jets that go on and seek out this hero ship, and they're going to go on and engage with it. And as eventually they do, they end up hopping into, I think, the Navaheim realm, where Hogan is looking like, what are these planes doing here? And he's very confused. So Jane and Eric are running around, and eventually here's where we have a Jotunheim beast that is going on and starting to attack some dark elves. At one point, we have Ian that goes on and flips this car to crush some dark elves. Ian is, or Darcy's looking at Ian and like, "Did you just save me?" And Ian's like, "Yeah." So the two of them kiss. All of a sudden, as Jane and Darcy are adjusting their handheld, all of a sudden Jane and Darcy appears in front of them and they're kissing, and then Ian falls on the ground. All of them go on and they all say their names at one another, and it's like, what the heck is going on here? So Thor is all over the place to the point to where Thor is now at to appear at this subway station. He goes on and looks at this woman at the subway and asks her, where exactly is Greenwich? Because he has no idea. The woman says, okay, 3 stops and you'll get there. So he goes onto the bus. And so while this, or bus, this subway. So while the subway is going on, she like bumps into him and she touches his chest on purpose. And Thor kind of like snickers, like, and then the subway keeps going on. It's like, well, yeah, like it seems weirdly enough that all these women want to keep touching Thor's body, and of course they should. Like even Darcy was going on like, yeah, you're still muscular and everything. Goes on and like touches his body and everything because of course she does. So, uh, so Eric tells Jane that they're running out of time, and so now as Thor makes his way back to Greenwich, meeting up with Jane and Eric, they're trying to figure out how to use these spikes to help them try to beat Malekith. And so, like, well, hey, if we go on and we use these spikes to try to use them as weapons against Malekith, like, there's no way that we can get close enough. And Thor is like, well, I can. So Thor goes on and starts to get closer to Malekith, and so Malekith tells Thor that he's going to be witnessing the end of his universe, and Thor is like, well, you're going to be witnessing your surrender soon. And so Malekith tells Thor that there's no way to destroy the ether, and Thor says, well, you can get destroyed, so if anything. Thor keeps going on and starts stabbing into Malekith, and his parts of his body starts to separate. His arm flies from one of the other Savart realms, and all parts of Malekith's body starts to completely separate, and eventually, at some point, Malekith crashes into his own ship, and eventually the ship comes falling down, and all of a sudden we're now back with, I think, the ship being teleported back at Savart, because Eric is to go on and is to teleport the whole ship away to protect Thor, because Thor is down on the ground, and Jane was running after him to try to drag him away from the ship as the ship is falling down. And Eric saves the day. So they all get back together, And so Jane, Eric, Ian, Dirt, like all the people are kind of gathered up together again, and they're talking about how Thor is now gone again after the crisis is now over, and so Jane is sure that Thor will be back, and Darcy's like, well, yeah, the last time he said that he was gone for 2 years, and Darcy's like, well, it's only been 2 days, like, well, like we'll kind of we'll assume that he'll come back. So so Thor makes his way back to Asgard to speak with Odin. There was also one point where Odin was showing some kind of weakness when he was talking to Thor about them finding the last breath, and then he kind of buckled a little bit. He kind of shuffled a little bit. So, like, if anything, it's really showing that like Odin is like really wearing down. Maybe getting close to another Odin sleep at some point. Because who knows how much time has passed between movies. So Thor makes his way to Odin, and so Odin is like, well, hey, like, every one of the other realms has gone on to see that you have saved all of them from this crisis. Uh, if anything, are you now uh, going to take on the mantle of King of Asgard? And what else could I offer you, Thor? And Thor is like, well, my life. Like, what do you mean by that? So Thor goes on to say to Odin that he cannot be the king of Asgard, that if anything, he much more so understands uh, what it is to be king, and that he doesn't want it. And because he can't do what he does while sitting on a throne of this kingdom. So, and that if Thor is to be stuck on this throne, like all he'll be thinking about is how to protect Asgard when Thor wants to go on and wants to protect everywhere else. To where Thor is always just very distracted on protecting all the other 9 realms, or Thor wants to definitely do more missions in Asgard than be here. And if he feels that he's the king, that he won't be able to do missions on Midgard, that he's stuck in Asgard to defend these people every day. But so Odin goes on and he talks about how Loki had wanted the throne too much, and Thor never at all, or not at all. So, but Thor wants to be rather a good man than a great king, and so Odin is going on and saying, it's like, well, are you saying this, or is Jane saying this? And Thor is like, well, every time that you talk, do I hear Frigga coming out of your mouth? Get Frigga's name out your mother mouth. Anyways, so there's a back and forth exchange going on here. Uh, so he says, one son who wanted the throne too much, and another who will not take it. That's what he meant. That's what I was trying to say. So so Loki is just like, is this the legacy that I'm going to leave behind? That there's going to be no king? And yeah, that kind of is what happens with Asgard in a way. Like, Valkyrie just goes on and she ends up being like the face of Asgard, and like there ends up being no legacy. There ends up being no follow up. So so Thor says that Loki died with honor, and Thor wants to live in honor. And so Thor goes on and hands over Mjolnir to Odin's like, no, 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 you keep that. Like, if anything, as long as you're worthy of it, you keep it. So, so as Thor starts to walk away, Odin is quite happy, honestly, that Thor is willing to walk away from the throne. Because if anything, Odin is actually Loki, and Loki's like, ha 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 ha. So while Thor is going to walk away, Loki can go on and do whatever he wants with his reign because now Loki can have the throne as Odin without anybody the wiser. So, and then that's when we see that Loki is to go on and thank Thor for leaving because Loki's going to go on, or Thor is going to go on and follow his heart instead of follow the throne. So now we get credits roll, and so now the end credit scenes go on and tie into eventually what is to be Infinity War. So both Volstagg and Lady Sif make their way to the Collector, who is to go on and take the Ether Infinity Stone, because you can't have two Infinity Stones in one location. Because the Collector goes on and says that the stone will probably be much safer at their vault, and Volstagg says no, like it doesn't make sense to have two Infinity Stones in one place. It just doesn't seem safe. So the Collector goes on and takes the stone. It's like, okay, one down, 4 or 5 to go. So after that, we then go on and we have Thor and Jane reuniting, and then we have the frost giant beast that's going on and chasing off some birds, and like that's our end credit scenes. So, with that said, that covers Thor: The Dark World. I did not think I would come back to this movie, but also, uh, Thor obviously for the prior channel was a big impactful thing, so I kind of felt that I needed to come back to this movie and redo it all over again, and just this more different approach. But also, I'm sure this one was a heck of a lot longer than the other video. Plus, also, there's a lot of times where I stumbled and I fumbled and I couldn't figure out where to go with this review, probably compared to the other one. Um, like, I still can't figure out this movie so easily. But either way, I'm gonna get that out of here because, yeah, like, uh, um, I'm a little tongue twisted right now. So thank you for watching this. Thank you guys for going on and making this a lot easier to want to come back to this channel and do this whole process all over again with doing all these reviews now on this channel instead of the one that was on this prior. Um, because yeah, like in a very short amount of time, I've already made a decent amount of progress to where it's like, oh, good that I went back into this, because I was thinking that I'm like, am I going to be able to justify coming back here, or I'm going to have to realize that what a mistake this was, and then just keep going right back onto that other channel and just keep chipping away at what I was already doing. No, it seems like right now I'm doing a good enough amount of progress to where I can be satisfied by it, to where I'm just like, okay, like if I'm making this kind of progress in just weeks of time, like if I just keep going on and making the right decisions, as well as also finally going on and covering content that I didn't do before, and just make better choices, maybe there is hope for this. But also, uh, I think I've realized that I've also need to do more new releases, because I think that's a big mistake. That I'm just kind of not. I'm kind of dodging a lot of these new release titles, and eventually the ones that I am covering of new releases are actually to my benefit. So far, well, like they're not huge breaking number things, but if anything, I don't know how well Batman Nightfall is gonna do, because that thing is just it's doing really decent numbers compared to all the other projects that I've probably been put out lately, where I've kind of had to scrape together uh, to get anywhere ballparkingly decent views on other projects. Where it seems like that one has just been taking off, which I'm grateful about. Hopefully, this video does some kind of ballparkingly uh, decent numbers. I hope. Um, but again, um, I'm having a lot of fun trying to be like, okay, like there were obviously some best of projects on the other channel, but like I don't want to rely on that. Like if anything, I want to go on and I want to still try to do things like as if none of that information on that other channel existed, and I can just find things that I didn't do before and just realize like, hey, why don't I try this? Like I never tried this movie before. Like I never tried this animated piece. Like I never tried these things. So I'm trying to be a lot more open minded, because by the time that I was ending my time on the other channel, it was just like I don't know what to do. Like I was just at a dire street where it's just like I think like I've just killed that other channel just by like me just feeling just stymied, and just me like needing to take days where like yeah, I had a lot to just figure out and just be like, oh yeah, like I can do all these projects, but like I didn't know at all what to do. Like now it seems that every day that I'm going into this, like I have a easy like ideas are just flowing so easily now that it's like it's easy to put pen to paper and get these things as quickly as possible to be done. Um, like I've finally kind of gotten out of my almost like uh, content creating block of sorts. So, and all I needed to do was just to go to another channel and start this kind of all over again. But I'm kind of worried we're really all the like if this is really going really well, like I'm kind of concerned about where all the views are really going, because as I'm kind of looking, like is it kind of going into much older content that had big views, like is it kind of just going to like some of the reviews that I'm doing, because I'm like I don't think that the reviews are doing that well, so I'm just kind of worried like uh if I get rid of some of the old, really old content that's on here that did well, how is that going to affect the channel? Like, was it to be just the really old content that was doing better? I don't know. If anything, like, I just have to hope that I can get into a, a momentum and a pattern of every one of these projects consistently doing all well, and so that way I won't have to worry at all about any of that old content. I could just kind of sweep that all under the rug. And because the biggest thing I was worried about is just having a library. That's why I brought back old videos from the other channel over here. Even though, like, it's kind of funny. Like, a lot of those videos had no success on the other channel. Comes over here, all of them are kind of like they're going decently well. Like, some of the videos I honestly had to go on and um, I had to make them look a lot better than what they really were, which attracted people, and that's very vague to say. So a lot of those videos, on the other channel had basically like 5 views to them. So when some of the older videos came over here, I honestly just kind of manufactured some views honestly under those videos, and some of them actually took off. So I was like, oh, so like, is that all I needed to do all along? Um, which that may sound horrible, but it's just like I'm trying to figure out how to do YouTube better. Like, if anything, I'm trying to figure out like how to build a better channel, and I'm also trying to put together better ideas or different ones than I did on the other channel, because I want this to be successful. Like, I want this to really like have a momentum, and whatever I got to do to be able to do that this time around, besides some of the stuff that I was doing on the other channels and other things, and eventually, like, I know I'm going to head back down that path at some point, but like right now, I'm riding so high off of everything of what we're doing that um I don't feel I'll need to resort to a number of just shenanigan tactics, even though I've gone on to do a little bit already. But like, if anything, just me kind of watching my own video isn't hurting anybody but me. So yeah, like I obviously just wanted to just make a video look better. Um, because if anything, like the videos struggled before, but now it seems like they're getting some kind of better momentum. Plus, also there's a number of people here that are actually checking things out, so I do appreciate it that. But I don't know. I also kind of feel like a fraud. Um, that I have to kind of rely on some of the stuff that I learned on the other channel to come and bring it here. I'm having to uh, kind of rely on like, man, I need to get like really big titles. I have to kind of chase IPs from like the biggest characters that I know, and basically I have to pull out everything that I know and everything. So yeah, so it's like I really want to hope that it just at some point that like that finally when I do this channel that all this will be worth it, and I won't feel like a fraud by the end of this. I won't feel like I had to like, because there was some times where I felt like I was going on, and I felt like on the other channel like I was kind of clickbaiting people into the projects, where it's just like, oh yeah, I had to do these kind of like thumbnails that were obviously kind of geared to a visual thing that kind of cued people to like, oh yeah, check out this movie because of this visual. Ooh ah. And I felt horrible about it, because like I didn't want to resort to that. I wanted to go on and do this the right honorable way, and like I didn't want to clickbait people into anything. But I think some people may go on and just see the length of the video and assume like, oh, it's the movie, it's the thing, and they click in it and they realize, oh, it's just somebody reviewing it for X number of hours. Because a lot of people are going on and saying about the whole like, hey, don't you do reactions? I want to see the footage. I don't care about what you're talking about here. That's understandable. This is kind of an old fashioned way of doing reviews, but also like I'm not gonna risk losing my channel or losing a video because I put a clip of something, whether it's an AI, whether it's actual footage, whether it's anything. Like, I'm not going to risk losing this channel that I've worked so hard on, as well as also all these projects that I've worked so hard on, because of just some clip that I put in here. Like, I know a lot of people go on and they do that, and they are successful at it. Good for them. Like, I'm happy that everyone in this community has that kind of success. I'm just not willing to take the risk, because all I need to do right now is just get minutes together, just get time together, just get X number of hours to finally get to the goal that I've been searching for years trying to accomplish. So, the barest of, like, for how I probably could have gone on and every single thing I could have done, like, I could have done way less videos and I could have just done all the greatest hits of the prior channel all on here. I could have taken all those videos from the last channel, just put them on here, thrusted all different kind of different thumbnails, and just done that, and probably would have gone on and made back the monetization goal and whatever, but I didn't do that. I tried to do this all honorable and just be like, okay, I'm gonna go on and do all these new videos, but also I'll go on and do these older ones in a different way. Um, but anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. This is gonna be too long of a video, anyways. No one's gonna hear or care about all this. Um, I appreciate everybody that's going on, and to have been on this journey with me, or people who have just come onto this video and be like, hey, 2.5 hours? Yeah, I get it, but I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, buddy. Goodbye, buddy.